Hey everyone, we are now on the week 8 of our subject, which is critical realism and the social sciences. By the way, I am Jamaishal Moreno and I am your first reporter. So what is critical realism? Critical realism is a branch of philosophy that distinguishes between the real world and the observable world. The real cannot be observed and exists independent of human perceptions, theories, and constructions. The world as we know and understand is constructed from our perspectives and experiences through what is observable. Thus, according to critical realists, unobservable structures cause observable events, and the social world can be understood only if people understand the structures that generate events. So, critical realism takes something from both uses of the term realism, but it also differs from them in important ways. It takes from the resigned acceptance usage the latter's clear recognition of the existence of an external world, independent of and often defying our desires of it and attempts to understand and change it. However, as the adjective critical might suggest, critical realists tend to share the social realist commitment to changing unsatisfactory or oppressive realities. Realists in the theory of knowledge are committed to the existence of a real world, which exists and acts independently of our knowledge or beliefs about it. However, they hold that this external world is in principle knowable and to some discoverable extent open to being changed on the basis of such knowledge as we are able to achieve. Sometimes, this view is caricatured by its opponents as claiming an absolutely certain, one-to-one correspondence between existing belief and the supposed reality of which it is knowledge. It seems unlikely that there are in fact any realists of whom this is true, but it certainly does not apply to critical realists. There are 4 features of critical realism which distinguish it from this caricature. First, critical realism holds that we can make sense of cognitive practices, such as the sciences, only on the assumption that they are about something which exists independently. It does not pronounce on whether the truth claims of any particular science at any particular time are true. Only the science concerned can make and evaluate such claims. Second, critical realism shares with most contemporary philosophy a reflexivity about the conditions of possibility for thought or language to represent something outside itself. As we will see, critical realism differs from empiricism in theorizing knowledge as a social process which involves variable means of representation. Third, critical realism differs from some other forms of realism in regarding the surface appearance of things as potentially misleading as to their true character. This is why knowledge has to be a process and an achievement. Work has to be done to get beyond or behind misleading appearances. This is why it is sometimes called adept realism, as it distinct from the empirical realism of the empiricists. Finally, and most importantly, critical realist insistence on the independent reality of the objects of our knowledge and the necessity of work to overcome misleading appearances implies that current beliefs will always be open to correction in the light of further cognitive working. Critical realism is thus fallibilist, in contrast to idealist and relativist theories of knowledge which insulate themselves from the possibility of being proved wrong by doing away with the idea of a knowable independent reality.
This is the realism and natural science, observable phenomena, metaphors, and mechanisms. Ang modernong agham ay hindi lamang nagsasabi sa atin ng pagkakaroon ng hindi hinihinalang malalim na instruktura sa mundo, ngunit ginagamit din ito upang ipaliwanag ang mga aspeto ng mundo na ating naranasan at kinikilala tulad ng pagbabago sa mga katangian ng mga pagkain kapag niluto natin ang mga ito. Ang gawain ng filosofiya ng agham ay subukang maunawaan ang mga anyo ng pagsisiyasat at pangangatwiran na nagbigay daan sa mga siyentipiko na gawain ito. What is the role of analogy and metaphor in scientific theory building? Ang mga siyentipiko ay umaasa sa metapora at pagkatulad upang magkaroon ng kahulugan sa mga pang-agham na fenomena at ipaalam ang kanilang mga natuklasan sa isa't isa at sa publiko. Ang mga siyentipiko ay umaasa sa metapora at pagkakatulad upang magkaroon ng kahulugan sa mga pang-agham na fenomena at ipaalam ang kanilang mga natuklasan sa isa't isa at sa publiko. Ang mga metapora ay isang mahalagang bahagi ng pag-agham sa pagkamalikhain dahil magbigay sila ng paraan para sa paghanap ng mga literal na paglalarawan ng mundo sa ating paligid. Hindi nito siyempre naayos ang isyu kung kailang nagbibigay katwiran ang mga siyentipiko. Paglipat mula sa samantalang paggamit ng isang metapora patungo sa pag-angkin na ang hypothe, ang laki ng mekanismo ay talagang umiiral. Mahalaga sa yugtong ito, gayon pa man upang kilalanin na may pagkakaiba sa pagitan ng kakayang patunayan ng umiiral. Ang mga realistikong teorya ng agham ay mga pagtatakang gawin, hindi, gayon pa man, ang makasasayang ebidensya ng sabay-sabay na pagtuklas ng mga mekanismo ng mga independenteng grupo ng mga siyentipiko at ang iba't ibang paraan kung saan iba't ibang mga agham ay natagpuan sa mga karaniwang paniniwala tungkol sa panagbabantayan ng mga mekanismo.
These arguments, ito ay nagsisimula sa kung ano ang itinuturing na hindi kontrobersyal na paglalarawan ng ilang kababalaghan or P. Ang tanong ay itinatanong, ano ang dapat na kaso para maging posible ang P? Ipagpapalagay natin na ang ilang kondisyon o estado ng mga pangyayari or C ay maaaring matukoy bilang isang kinakailangang kondisyon para sa P ay aktwal. Kung gayon, ito ay dapat na posible at kung kaya't ang mga kondisyon na ginagawang posible ay dapat na matugunan. Kaya C ang dapat ng kaso. An example from social life might be, si Jane ay isang mag-aaral, para sa sinumang maging isang mag-aaral ay dapat mayroong mga guro, mga katawan ng kaalaman at ituturo at matutuhan, mga institusyong pang-edukasyon o pangtukuyin ang mga tungkulin ng guro at mag-aaral at iba pa. Dahil si Jane ay isang mag-aaral, ang mga kinakailangang kondisyon ng posibilidad para sa isang tao na maging isang mag-aaral ay dapat na matugunan. At sa gayon, ang halimbawa ay maaari nating tapusin ang mga institusyong pang-edukasyon ay umiiral. Sa ganitong medyo halatang may mga kaso, ang transcendental na argumento ay may mga konklusyon na hindi masyadong nakakagulat o kawili-wili. Gayunpaman, sa realistikong teorya o natural na agham ni Roy Bhaskar, ang mga argumento na ganitong uri ay humantong sa ilang napakawili-wili at mahalagang konklusyon. Bhaskar construct transcendental arguments on the basis of uncontroversial descriptions of scientific practices tulad ng pag-i-eksperimento, mga hindi pagkakaunawaan sa mga siyensa at paggamit ng mga kaalamang scientifico sa teknolohiya. Kung tatanungin natin ang mga tanong, ano ang dapat na kaso para sa mga scientificong eksperimento upang maging posible? Ang mga sagot ay nahahati sa dalawang grupo. Ang mga ito ay sa isang banda, mga pahayag tungkol sa kung ano ang dapat ang mundo para maging posible, ang mga eksperimento. At sa kabilang banda, mga pahayag tungkol sa kung ano ang dapat ng mga scientificong investigator para makapagpasagawa sila ng mga eksperimento. Bhaskar uses the term intransitive dimension to characterize the reference of the first set of statement and the term transitive dimensions for the second. Gumagamit si Bhaskar ng terminong intransitive na dimension upang tukuyin ang mga referent ng unang set ng mga pahayag at ang terminong transitive na dimension para sa pangalawa. So the intransitive dimension where we no longer observe subject and objects, but a developing whole or contexture against which anything recognizable as individual can set up. It is the unfolding contexture that generates both text and context.
Good day everyone, I'm Dailin Veras Duriga from BSN English Session 2. The empiricist view of scientific laws as general statement event has already been to be open a number of serious criticisms. The starting point for the critical realist is to note that such regular series of observable events are rather as nature one of the planet's solar systems. However, if we consider, for example, the weather, then on a day-to-day basis, prediction is notoriously unreliable even when meteorology is a well-resourced and established science. This because the actual equence. If climatic conditions is any particular place is outcome of the interplay of many different factors, pressure and air movement, electrical potentials, temperatures and different altitude, humidity levels and so on. In Baskar's account, scientific experiment is particular intervention which seeks to isolate just one mechanisms so that its operation can be studied without the interference of its experience or tendencies of the underlying mechanisms outside an artificial experiment situations. So, for example, research might show that the underlying mechanisms is the dragonfly. This is the secretion of a particular hormone is a response to a given psychological mechanism linked to a maternal stage light exposure contact with the other individuals of the same of other species and so on. So, for example of experiments, laws, and mechanism. This means that establishing a mechanism thought a mechanism experience will not be a sufficient condition for establishing that a policy will work. Okay. Reality as stratified. A strict empiricism can recognize only label phenomena as a real. A more empiricism may recognize the existence of an experience. Baskars call such a position actualism, but the distinctive feature of transcendental critical realism is its claim to demonstrate the independent reality of the third level can be inferred from the intelligibility of experimental practice as such, and it also, of course, what makes experiments to discover and knowledge could be merely a matter of observing and summarizing. Remember, however, that the analysis of experimentation shows only that the most underlying causal mechanisms and power it does not tell us anything about. What they are, that is a matter. So that claim made by critical realism is that there are reality independent of our scientific investigation of it, but also that this reality is stratified. So, for example of reality as stratified. In most societies, stratification is an economic system based on wealth, the next value of money assessed of a person.
Our topic for today is all about stratification, emergence, and reduction. The idea of reality as layered or stratified can be taken further. Once the science has discovered mechanism which constitute to the level or aspect of reality, has subject matter and is then possible to ask what different level mechanism are responsible for those and so on. So when we say stratification, it is all about layered. So we might put science ordering something like this: social science, psychology, anatomy, organic, chemistry, or biological, chemistry, physical, chemistry, physics. Since our topic is all about layered, like for example in the science that discovered mechanism, which constitute the level. Science must ordering something like social science, psychology, anatomy, organic, and so on. This corresponds to a view of science explaining whole in terms of the part of which they are composed. It will be noticed that several sciences don't seem to fit into this hierarchy at all. So this include ecology, geography, meteorology, oceanography, and so on. So although the general idea of science uncovering layers of a stratified reality is quite widely shared, there remain many issues which divide critical realists among themselves and also divide them from other realist approaches. So it deals with two issues. First, we think about the relationship between levels. If the mechanism of one level are held to explain at a higher level, so it might also happen that the lower level science has been established and it can replace at the higher level. Because if one thing does not really exist or no longer used or needed, of course, we should replace it like in the higher level. So there are the reason why reductionism that does work or does not work. First, the lower level science explain only the constitution of the mechanism at the higher level. It is not explained when or with what effect the powers of established with those mechanism will be exercised. Second, once a higher level mechanism are formed, their activities have effect on lower level ones. It is also follows that science of the lower level mechanism can contribute to explaining but never completely explain the behavior of higher level ones or higher level mechanism. So equally, however, it seems clear that unless human beings had certain innate psychological capacities and disposition, it would not be possible for society to shape them in the way it does. Consideration like this point to a branching hierarchy in which psychology and the social science would figure at the same level, with mutual interdependence of mechanism described by each. Our culture shapes the way we work and play, and it makes it different in how we view ourselves and others. It affects our values. This is how the society we live in influence our choices. But our choices can also influence others and ultimately help society shape our society. However, a view of human social life as involving only human individuals and involving them into a virtue of their mental activities would be drastically reversed. Central features of human society, the way they organize production of food, clothing, and shelter, the relationship through which they regulate sexuality, reproduction, and child rearing, and so on. A concept of individual and a concept of society have been given the state of real substantial independent object. An individual is accessible without the relationship to others and defined internal, subjective, under external socially desired rules. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
So good afternoon to each and everyone, especially to our instructor, Miss Lin Banganon. So to continue discussion under the chapter 8, my topic is all about reality as differentiated, closed and open system. So this is Ram Roy Bhaskar, 1944 to 2014. He was an English philosopher of science who is best known as the initiator of the philosophical movement of critical realism, or the CR. Bhaskar introduced closed and open system. So let's talk about open system. What is an open system? According to Bhaskar, open system is where mechanism naturally exists in isolation, or there is a balance of interfering mechanism. So open system, it is a system and exchange of matter with its environment presenting import and export. A system that freely exchanges energy and matter in its surrounding. So this is the illustration that shows the process of an open system. Next, we have the closed system. According to Bhaskar,
closed system is where there is artificial isolation or control of interfering mechanism. It allows only energy but no transfer of mass. So, closed system is a limit case, a system for which the environment has no significance only through specific channels. So, in that illustration, it shows also the process of closed system. So let's move on to the next topic, and that is transitive dimension. We can now turn to the second set of answers to the question, what must be the case for science to be possible? Human action is intrinsic to the transitive dimension. So, it generates that new knowledge, thus people are active participants in the transitive dimension. Here, critical realism is close to Kohn, Feyerabend, and the sociologists of science in recognizing the social and historical character of science. Science, as a social practice, presupposes the institution of scientific communication and criticism, and the role of metaphor in scientific reasoning implies the existence of a culture which can be drawn for the conceptual raw materials for the production of scientific knowledge. So truly, critical realism as a theory of science has an account in scientific experiment and is more on successful scientific inquiry. So let's move on to realism and social science. Rom Hari, one of the most influential advocates of realist approach to natural science, is strongly committed to methodological individualism in the social sciences. The prominent critical realist Andrew Collier has argued that because experimental closure is impossible in the social sciences, so Rom Hari is advocator of natural science, and Andrew Collier is a prominent of critical realist. They have different views and opinions regarding social sciences. Roy Bhaskar advocates yet another position, which he terms critical naturalism. On Bhaskar 1998, this approach accepts the main burden of the interpretivist or hermeneutic critique of the positivist version of naturalism, that is, in this context, the proposal to study society on the model of natural science. So in this, Bhaskar's consideration of the philosophies of science resulted in the development of critical realism. He implies that it still have possibilities to have a science of society in the same sense as the sciences of nature. So let's move on to social ontology, structure, and agency. In the example of someone cashing a check or being a student will represent ontology. Both actions, as described, are possible only on condition that the agent is situated in a set of institutional relations which exist. This is the sort of point that a structuralist might make. So social ontology concerned with analyzing the various of entities in the world that arise from social interaction. So in the example, if someone cashing a check expected that there has to be a banking system to offer a services to the customer. So the outcome of social action in either reproducing or transforming social structures may be unintended, as when employees go to work in order to earn a living, but in doing so also help reproduce capitalist relations of production without particularly wanting to do so. Or it may be intended, as in the case of successful social movement or political mobilization. So this implies that social structures that is unintended, it means it is functions for a designated system, while those intended actions are designed to be beneficial to individual. Thus, social structures and human agents are distinct from each other. And that's the end of my discussion. Thank you.
So the last one is the critical realism on human emancipation. Critical realism is a branch of philosophy that distinguishes between the real world and the observable world. The real cannot be observed and exists independent from human perceptions, theories, and constructions. The world as we know and understand it is constructed from our perspective and experiences. So, what is observable? Thus, according to critical realists, unobservable structures cause observable events, and the social world can be understood only if people understand the structures that generate the events. Critical realism was developed during the 1970s at a time when Marxism was strongly represented among the social scientists. Marxism was one of the few approaches to social science whose explicit philosophical commitments coincided with the main outlines of critical realism. It remains open to question how far the continuing association with Marxist ideas is explicit in critical realism, and how far it is merely contingent phenomenon. However, at least in Roy Bhaskar version, there is a necessary connection between critical realist philosophy and emancipatory politics. In this respect, Bhaskar version of realism is like Habermas' social theory. Both see close connection between knowledge of self and society and human emancipation, or freedom from domination. Indeed, the link between knowledge and emancipation is made on very closely related basis by the two thinkers. In Bhaskar argument, Bhaskar 1979, 1998, 69 to 91, and Kohler 1994 in Chapter 6. The key concept is that of an experimentary critique, the paradigm sense of this is Marxist critique of the wage form in Volume 1, Chapter 19 of Capital. Marx takes the common sense of understanding the wage contract as an exchange of given amount of labor to sum of money. Since employer are the free agents, there is no reason to doubt the normal assumption that this is generally an exchange equivalence, and so that expressions such as a fair day's work for a fair day's pay are at least sometimes odd descriptions. So, developments in the wider social and political context of social terrorizing have also had their consequences for the directions taken by critical realism. There has been a growing concern with approach as a basis for understanding the relationship between socioeconomic processes and the natural environment, and along with the decline in explicit commitment to Marxian analysis among the social scientific academy. There has been continuing discussion about the relationship between critical realism and Marxism, as well as other ethical theories. In Chapter 12 of this edition, Commentary on Recent Developments, I provide a more detailed literature review of at least some of these issues.